I have no question in my mind that this is going to be the end of Diddy as we know him. I can't see how he gets out of this. I just can't.
For the past 2 weeks, it's been all P. Diddy all the time, in the wake of some pretty shocking allegations.
This is a bombshell, and this is something where the impact is going to be reverberating around the globe for a variety of reasons.
And in case you somehow missed it, we've got a complete recap of everything we know so far and what could be coming down the pipeline.
It'll be the perp walk that'll be covered by every single outlet around the globe.
We've talked to experts, attorneys, investigators, and those closest with Diddy, and we're putting it all together here for you to make sense of everything as we know it right now.
If you had any semblance of respect left for Diddy after the Cassie filing, it's definitely gone after Lil Rod, no question.
For the past 3 decades, we've come to know Sean Combs as multiple different names. P. Diddy, Puffy, Puff Daddy, Puff. The 54-year-old is a rapper, entrepreneur, and label exec. Things changed for him on March 25th when Homeland Security raided 2 of his homes, one in California and the other in Florida. There's no word yet whether Diddy himself was the target of those raids, and he's not been charged criminally. That being said, some allegations of his criminal past became a major topic of conversation when news of the raids broke.
That's what was so stunning when Cassie Ventura filed her lawsuit earlier this year. It kind of broke the dam, and it was just the floodgates opened and all of these other allegations started to come to the surface.
That's Melba Pearson, a former prosecutor who's followed the Diddy case meticulously since it broke. Her interest actually dates back farther than just last month, when Diddy's Bad Boy for Life mantra was just a song. And we know about the allegations now that have happened in the past couple months via these civil suits. But if we go back, I know that you have kind of followed Diddy for a while and you're pretty knowledgeable about that era. From the 90s until now, prior to these civil lawsuits being filed, was there talk of wrongdoing on Diddy's behalf?
There really wasn't. To compare him to R. Kelly, for instance, there were rumors swirling around R. Kelly from the beginning. And that started off with his marriage to a very underage Aaliyah. And that's when folks were like, okay, something doesn't seem right here. But kind of put it to the side, just kind of put a pin in it for a few decades until all the bombshell allegations and ended up being proved in a court of law came forth. I feel like with Diddy, we didn't hear that much. We knew that he partied hard. We knew that he was always going to high profile events and all of that. But I personally have never heard any rumors surrounding any wrongdoing or anything having to do with him. This is an artist who really came to prominence in the 90s. We remember all of the videos. He was very close with Biggie Smalls, who also tragically lost his life back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And so he was somebody who had this whole orbit around him, and so many different artists like Maze and all these different folks that sprung out from this record label and orbit that they were in. So he had a huge impact on what R&B and hip hop looked like in the 90s and the 2000s, and continued to be influential today in terms of other artists that have, gained prominence and gained fame, as well as him as a producer having this really huge presence in the industry. So absolutely, this is a bombshell, and this is something where the impact is going to be reverberating around the globe for a variety of reasons.
But during this era, Diddy did have some trouble with the law. Back in 1999, he was arrested and charged in a shooting at a New York nightclub. His then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez and rapper Shyne were also arrested. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but it was Shyne who faced the most serious charges: 3 counts of attempted murder and criminal possession of a weapon. Ultimately, both Diddy and Shyne went to trial. Diddy was acquitted, but Shyne was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country of Belize. If we're looking at it in the 1999 lens, or the early 2000s when they went to trial, what was everyone making of it then?
So I think people were not horrified per se. I think they looked at it as, well, this is part and parcel of the hip hop industry. I don't think it was very shocking because, there's definitely a perception, somewhat reality as well, that there is violence in the hip hop community and sort of that beef between different groups or different labels. We all know about the East Coast, West Coast beef that was going on during the 90s with Tupac on one side, Biggie on the other. So this was something that was an outgrowth of that time frame. So I don't think folks were super shocked at that juncture. I think what was more shocking was sort of Jennifer Lopez's involvement in all of this, because I don't think, even though she was like, yeah, I'm Jenny from the block, I don't think anybody really saw her as really going to be that quote unquote that chick who is coming with the firearm and is going to hold it down and ride or die for her man. Like, I don't think people really saw that of her. So I think that was the most shocking part of the case back in 1999. But the fact that Diddy and Shine, who was the artist who was involved in that incident, the fact that they were charged, I don't think anybody was super stunned.
The reason that we're talking about this decades-old shooting now is because it was brought up in a recent civil suit against Diddy. We'll take a closer look at the lawsuits against him soon, but for now, let's focus on this specific part of Rodney Jones or Lil Rod's civil suit. Here's what Lil Rods Lawsuit says, quote, Mr. Combs shared that he was responsible for the shooting in the nightclub in New York City with rapper Shine. Mr. Combs' girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Lopez, aka J-Lo, carried the gun into the club for him and passed him the gun after he got into an altercation with another individual. Now, with these renewed allegations that Diddy was the one responsible for the shooting, it's possible that investigators take another look at the case and reopen it. We spoke to Bobby Chacon, former FBI agent, about this. If there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation, what would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago?
It would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now, federal charges can be different. You can have RICO, you can have a continuing criminal enterprise, you can have, so the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them when I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up. You can, when I worked cold cases of this type, sometimes with time, with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who was the threat, and they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in lieu of testimony. But certainly, I think that that case is going to be part of it. In the aftermath of that, they have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors. And certainly when you have that kind of stuff, if you go back and you find that juror that was paid off, or jurors, multiple, that may have been paid off, certainly that gives you the impetus to kind of come forward and refresh those charges on a federal case. So the federal cases will be a little different. The charges are a little different, so it's not double jeopardy. And so I think that case that you mentioned, that you cite, I think is certainly one of the ones they're looking to build into a much bigger, to me, maybe a RICO type case.
3 people were injured in the shooting, including Natanya Rubin. She's come forward over the past 2 weeks saying Diddy was the one who shot her in the face, not Shine. We talked to Bobby about this too. So could her allegations change things, increase the likelihood of an investigation ahead?
Oh, absolutely. When you have a witness like that, and I've seen those videos of her, I mean, she says, look, I was shot in the face, so I was staring at the person who shot me. I know it was him. I mean, that's pretty strong evidence. The defense obviously tried to discredit her, but that's pretty strong evidence from a victim of a crime like that. She wasn't shot in the back where she couldn't see. She was literally shot in the face, and she said, I was looking right at the person who shot me. So yeah, that's very, very strong evidence, and certainly, I'm sure they've talked to her already, and she would be a strong witness.
If we believe what's written in Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy straight up told Lil Rod Diddy, was the one responsible for the shooting, not Shine. That's also what we're hearing from Mark Curry, a rapper who worked with Diddy and appears on the song Bad Boy for Life. In multiple interviews, Mark has alleged Diddy paid off Shine in order to take the fall for him. We actually spoke to Mark right here on Law&Crime, where I asked him about these allegations.
I know that the incident that happened at Club New York it was with Puff and Shine, and J-Lo was there, and and Wolf was there. It was a very unfortunate situation because it was a female, I believe, that may have got shot or something like that during the situation, but it was not a good situation. And I don't say it was a payoff, but you say Sean went and did a long time in prison, and then when he came home from prison, they extradited him and made him go back to Belize. And he couldn't come back and put his foot on the United States soil again. And to me, I was like, why? Only thing, he didn't really do anything to really get to where he can't come back. And then when you broke down everything, it was his voice would have been too powerful to say the truth. So in order to hide the truth, let's hide the person that has the voice. So to me, it was like, yo, you're hiding the person with the voice because you don't want him to tell his truth. And that's that. So it's like, okay, for you to go over here and live, it was a time where I think they had gave him a record deal, and he was supposed to do an album, and we never heard an album from him. But to me, the money that they gave him to do the record deal, the way that it was given to him and how that process went was just kind of a way to give him some money to say, hey, you know what? Take care of yourself, live life. Here's something from someone. And that's how that one went.
So we've got these allegations that Diddy was responsible as the shooter, but also allegations that J-Lo carried the weapon that Diddy used in the shooting. What's interesting here is that Cassandra Ventura, known publicly as the singer Cassie, says Diddy made her do the same thing. She filed a lawsuit in November of last year, laying out some pretty severe allegations about Diddy. To start, there's that gun allegation that on at least 2 occasions, Diddy demanded Cassie hold his gun in her purse. The lawsuit goes on to state, quote, there was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his gun, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous.
Not only did Jennifer Lopez allegedly bring the gun to the club, now we're also looking at years later, Cassie coming forward and saying that Diddy forced her to carry a gun with her when they went out to different events. So again, I think that this is more along the lines of when you look at this from a domestic violence lens, from the standpoint of the abuser being very controlling and demanding certain activities to prove loyalty, to basically put yourself in a bad situation where only he can be the one to save you, basically. So in seeing that, the parallels between J-Lo's experience and Cassie's experience, number one, it brings more credibility to what Cassie said in her pleadings. But also, again, it causes us to look at Jennifer Lopez and be like, some of the comments she made about the end of her relationship to Diddy, in terms of, well, there was infidelity, and, she kind of skirted the issue a bit. But when you start to look back at her comments, you start to think, ooh, were you in a domestic violence relationship with Diddy, much like how Cassie ended up in a domestic violence relationship with him?
What would have made her want to come forward, and what did you take away from that civil suit?
So the reason why she came forward at this juncture is because New York and California both passed laws around, which was called the Adult Survivor Act. So that basically extends the statute of limitations. So when it comes to any criminal charge in this country, there is a statute of limitations, which is a set amount of time in which charges can be brought, right? And then after that expires, that's it. End of the story, right? The only charge that does not have statute of limitations on it is homicide, murder. So if there was a murder, then clearly you could be prosecuted 20 years later, 30 years later. But like, a gun possession charge or something like that, if it happened 10, 15 years ago, that's the end of it. So Cassie, under the Adult Survivors Act, was able to file charges because the Adult Survivors Act extended the statute of limitations for, sexual assault and sort of sexual related crimes. The reason why this happened was because, again, we saw with Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and so many others, the women or the people were victimized when they were younger, maybe just starting their careers. And they were afraid at that time to come forward because they figured, well, it'll be my word against his. He's this big, powerful person. Who would believe me? I'm just getting started, or I don't have the financial ability to file this suit and, be able to take care of myself and move forward. So now with that distance, with that time elapsed, and Cassie was able to move on with her life, start a new relationship. I believe she started a family. She let go of some of her musical ambitions, sadly, because of the fact that Diddy was controlling her career and would not allow her to release another album unless she did some horrible, horrible things. And even though she did those things, she still was not able to ascend in her musical career despite her having that talent. So now that she's more mature, she's older and more secure, she feels comfortable in coming forward. And in doing so, opened the floodgates in terms of, first of all, breaking that image that we had of Diddy. And now we're seeing a whole other person, and then emboldening other survivors to come forward, which resulted in, I believe, 3 or 4 other women coming forward. And then, of course, now you have the bombshell lawsuit from Lil Rod that just, I mean, if you had any semblance of respect left for Diddy after the Cassie filing, it's definitely gone after Lil Rod, no question.
Beyond the gun allegations, Cassie put forth some other major accusations in her 35-page lawsuit. She says Diddy beat her, sometimes so severely that she had to hide out in hotels for days at a time, waiting for her bruises to heal. Cassie also alleged Diddy raped her and forced her to have sex with prostitutes and even recorded it. Then there's the allegation that Diddy got jealous when Cassie began flirting with the rapper Kid Cudi. She says Diddy blew up his car. Was there anything that really stood out to you in that lawsuit as a shocking allegation?
All of it. All of it. Just the vileness of it all, right? Like the fact that you force your girlfriend to have sex with sex workers, for his entertainment. And there's no consent here whatsoever. This is purely him forcing her into degrading situations for his own enjoyment. So it was just that level of depravity, I think, that really shocked me, because I was like, whoa. Like, especially being a former prosecutor, the worst side of humanity, right? There's no question about that. But to see in such explicit and graphic detail the horrors that this young woman went through, only because she fell in love with the wrong person and thought that he also could help her career. She just wanted to sing, literally. And as a result of being involved with this person, she ended up being in situations that nobody has any business being in, but certainly, a young woman who is being drugged and forced to, consume drugs and to, basically be trafficked. And it just, all of it really horrified me and just made me really, my heart just went out to her, because I was just devastated reading that and thinking about the fact that she had to endure all of this alone, and the shame that she probably felt, and all of the healing and recovery she had to go through to be able to get to the point of feeling strong enough to be able to file this lawsuit. So all of those things go through my mind when it comes to her.
What's interesting about Cassie's lawsuit, too, is that she came forward with all of this information, and then a day later is when the lawsuit was settled between her and Diddy. And a lot of people are saying, is that because she knew more than she was letting on in this lawsuit and Diddy didn't want that to come out? Why may it have been settled so quickly?
I think it was settled quickly because, number one, I think he was calling her bluff. He didn't believe that she was going to file that lawsuit, because remember, like, the lawsuit gets filed, but there's usually machinations and discussions beforehand, right? It's not like completely out of the blue, this lawsuit just comes out of nowhere. So these discussions were happening between her counsel and his counsel, being like, listen, hey, this thing is going to get filed. So what do you want to do? Do you want to settle? And he's probably like, you don't have the guts to file this, right? And she's like, really? Watch me. She went, she filed it. And then the next day he's like, oh, she really wasn't kidding. And also he was like, wait a minute, I got to do damage control for my brand. And so he's like, all right, let me leap into action and settle this for, and I'm sure it was for an exorbitant amount, because he did not want all of these other folks to come forward. He did not want everyone knowing his very violent and disgusting proclivities. And, he basically was just trying to do damage control, but it was too late.
I mean, you mentioned there that he was hoping to not have others come forward, but it's interesting that several more people have come forward. There's 4 additional lawsuits, 2 Cassies, and several of them mention Cassie by name and say, hey, because she came forward and told us about these allegations, we felt comfortable doing the same thing. So did it really backfire for Diddy then?
I think it did. I think it did because if this had been settled without any kind of public involvement, any kind of media coverage, these other people may never have come forward. So by, you know, kind of calling her bluff and saying, oh, yeah, there's no way you're going to file this, he did himself a whole lot of damage. But I'm glad because at least now the truth is going to come out and everyone will know who this person is. And now, of course, that kicked everything into high gear in terms of law enforcement involvement and investigations. So as much as this whole thing is sad and sordid, I'm glad that it's coming out so that more survivors can get the closure that they need and that he can be brought to justice for the crimes he's perpetrated on others.
Among those other lawsuits, another filed under the New York Survivors Act by Joy Dickerson Neal. Her allegations date back to 1991 when she was a student at Syracuse University. Joy says Diddy intentionally drugged her, resulting in her being in a physical state where she could not independently stand or walk. Joy also alleges she's a victim of revenge porn because Diddy allegedly recorded the rape and passed around that videotape. According to her suit, Joy demands a jury trial, as does Liza Gardner, who also says Diddy raped her in New York in the 90s. According to her civil suit, Liza and her friend met Diddy at a party and later went with him to an after party where she, quote, was offered more drinks and coerced into having sex with Combs. Liza says Diddy and another man raped her and her friend. Later on, she says Diddy choked her to the point that she lost consciousness. While Jane Doe doesn't list her name in the lawsuit, she does list multiple photos of herself and Diddy. Her allegations date back to 2003 when she was just 17 years old and in 11th grade. Her lawsuit states at this time, Diddy was twice her age and one of the most well-known and influential music artists of all time. Jane Doe alleges Diddy flew her from Michigan to New York on a private plane and raped her in a recording studio. All this leads us back to Lil Rod's 74-page lawsuit that was filed back in February, detailing a laundry list of wild accusations. Melba says all this parallels a trajectory we've seen before.
Oh, it absolutely is a fall from grace. I have no question in my mind that this is going to be the end of Diddy as we know him, right? And the next chapter is going to be him incarcerated, much like R. Kelly. And which is, of course, sad, tragic, and horrible, not only for him, but more importantly for the survivors who have gone through some horrific experiences. But yeah, I think this is definitely going to be the end because with all of the allegations that have come forward and come forth at this juncture, all the artists that have come forward alleging wrongdoing, I can't see how he gets out of this. I just can't.
According to Lil Rods Lawsuit, he lived with Diddy for months at a time while working on Diddy's Love album. During this time, he says Diddy sexually assaulted him, forced him to have sex with prostitutes, and drugged him. On top of all this, Lil Rod says his allegations are corroborated with hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in some serious illegal activity because Diddy apparently required Lil Rod to record him constantly. The lawsuit even lays out some pictures, like this one, showing Cuba Gooding Jr. with his arm around Lil Rod. According to this suit, Lil Rod alleges Diddy was, quote, grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. Court documents go on to state, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones' legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, the small of his back near his buttocks, and his shoulders. We'll note right here, we haven't heard from Cuba about these allegations since the lawsuit was filed, and he doesn't face criminal charges in relation to Lil Rod's accusations. But we do know he's faced similar allegations in the past. Back in 2019, Cuba was booked on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse after allegedly groping a woman in Times Square. By the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling but no jail time. We actually spoke to Melba about this early on, and she says it may be tough for Cuba to combat.
I'm getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have two different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, years apart. I think there's something there. And I don't know that Cuba Gooding Jr. is going to escape from that one, because he already saw definitely people moving away from him within Hollywood circles and other circles once those first sexual assault allegations came out. So at this point, I don't think he's going to get away with it a second time.
On top of pictures of Cuba, Lil Rods Lawsuit lays out multiple others, including pictures of other defendants like Diddy's son, Justin Combs. According to the suit, Justin solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers, and would engage in freak-offs. After the lawsuit was filed, Justin Combs' rep made a statement reading, quote, "Justin Combs categorically denies these absurd allegations. They are all lies. This is a clear example of a desperate person taking desperate measures in hopes of a payday. There will be legal consequences for all defamatory statements made about the Combs family." But then last Thursday, Diddy's other son, Christian Combs, who goes by the name King Combs, was the subject of a civil suit filed in LA. Plaintiff Grace Omar K., who is represented by the same attorney as Lil Rod, alleges Christian Combs drugged her and sexually assaulted her on a yacht in late 2022. Christian's attorney says the lawsuit is made up of, quote, manufactured lies and irrelevant facts, and they are seeking to dismiss the outrageous claims. The allegations go farther than Diddy's relatives, but also his closest associates, like Chief of Staff Christina Coram, who's listed as a defendant in Lil Rod's suit. Lil Rod goes so far as to compare her to Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's longtime companion, who was eventually convicted on federal sex crimes charges. He alleges she and others received financial benefits in return for assistance, support, and facilitation of Combs' sex trafficking venture. So far, we haven't heard from her about these allegations. But then there are other defendants listed, like corporations such as Universal Music Group and Motown Records, along with their higher-ups. To understand this, I spoke to entertainment attorney Mitra Ohurian. In addition to these record labels that are listed as defendants, they also list CEOs, a former CEO of Motown Records and then a current CEO of UMG. So I'm wondering why, in addition to these labels, are they listing the CEOs?
Yeah, they're trying to pierce the corporate veil. They're trying to say that, you as individuals also were aware of these things happening. What I found incredibly shocking and disturbing was that they were listing personal addresses of people's homes. And that was very surprising to me that they didn't, redact that. That would worry me with not only something that's so high profile, but also something where there are a lot of, potential violent actors that might be tangentially involved. And so that naming them individually, I think, again, is really this, throw everything against the wall and see what sticks and make a lot of people very nervous.
Let's pause this P. Diddy story for a quick second to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime news package. It's stories like this that remind you never know what's going to happen, and the world is an unpredictable place. So when you're hurt, it can be confusing, it can be scary, and you don't really know where to turn. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less on your phone and find out if you have a case. If you do, your injury could be worth millions. In the past couple of months, they've gotten verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, and $6.8 million in New York. Also, they have over 1,000 lawyers, so you'll be in good hands. So if you're interested, you can start by easily submitting a claim at www.forthepeople.com/LCnews or by dialing #law, that's #529 on your phone. All right, let's get back to that story. So Lil Rod straight up names UMG's current CEO, Lucian Charles Grange, and Motown Records' former CEO, Ethiopia Habtemariam, as defendants. They've both pushed back on that inclusion, though. In a statement, Ethiopia says in part, quote, "Being falsely accused of criminal conduct is deeply upsetting to me. I did no wrong. I never saw or participated in any alleged racketeering enterprise, and I never saw, aided, or abetted, or tried to conceal any sex trafficking activity." In short, there's no basis for any of the claims asserted against me, and I should never have been named a defendant in this lawsuit. Her name has since been dropped as a defendant in the suit. And as for Lucian Grange, his attorney says adding his name as a defendant is an attempt to fit a square peg into a round hole. So this is Donald Zacharin, who's representing Universal Music Group, Motown Records, and Grange. In a recent filing, he included sworn statements from 2 executives at UMG who counter what Jones alleged in his lawsuit. Zacharin also makes clear UMG has no ownership in Love Records, another defendant listed. But then there are people who are just named in the lawsuit, but not listed as defendants. We've already talked about Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jennifer Lopez, but Prince Harry is also name dropped. It's almost a throwaway line though. It reads, quote, "Mr. Combs was known for throwing the best parties. Affiliation with and/or sponsorship of Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garnered legitimacy and access to celebrities such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries like British Royal Prince Harry." That means Prince Harry isn't accused of any wrongdoing, but a different person mentioned in the suit is. That's 25-year-old Brendan Paul. That's body cam of Brendan after his arrest in Miami a few weeks ago. He was taken into custody at the airport while trying to board Diddy's private jet. He was booked for cocaine and controlled substance possession after investigators say they found drugs in his bag. He's since been released on bond. But this wasn't the first time we heard Brendan's name. He's in Lil Rods Lawsuit, where he's described as, quote, "Mr. Combs' mule. He acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns." His name came up when I asked about people mentioned in Lil Rods Lawsuit.
They will be hearing from investigators if they haven't already. Well, Brendan, we know, heard from investigators because he was arrested at the Opa-locka airport in Miami. And, I believe he had narcotics on him with the cocaine. So, he's facing charges with regards to that. But this is a race to the courthouse steps. So when you have these lower level arrests, these are things that can be used to put pressure on the defendant to be like, listen, you're being charged with, trafficking amount of cocaine, for instance. We can drop those charges against you if you testify against P. Diddy, or tell us at least everything you know about the events surrounding P. Diddy, surrounding Cassie, Lil Rod, etc. And my guess would be Brendan will take them up with a swiftness and say, listen, yes, I did this, but it was at the behest of Diddy. I was forced into it, or whatever the story is, and he will sing like a canary in order to avoid criminal liability. So I could totally see that. Same thing with Young Miami, and though she's not facing charges, she may be thinking from the perspective of, okay, my name's out there. Let me do what I can to clear my name and to show that I'm fully cooperating with authorities, that I don't co-sign what Diddy was doing to other people. So I could see that being the impetus for her wanting to testify and cooperate with law enforcement.
Following Paul's arrest, his attorney Brian Bieber sent us a statement. It reads, quote, "We do not plan on trying this case in the media. All issues will be dealt with in court." Someone we know for sure is speaking with investigators, though, is Cassie. Melba says she's not surprised.
I expect that she would have, because again, if she's telling the truth, then she's going to give any evidence that she has. So in terms of if there's recordings she knows existed, right? I mean, she may not have possession of it, but she could be like, listen, in July of 2005, he forced me to do XYZ at, this particular hotel. There may be surveillance footage to show me going in and out of the building. There may be video that he took of the horrible events that may have happened that day. So now at least law enforcement will know exactly where to look and start to narrow down different timelines, and then also speak to other witnesses or maybe other survivors that were present and victimized at another point in time, but they can help corroborate some of what she's saying. And that is going to help put together the case against Diddy, likely for human trafficking, for sex trafficking, narcotics charges, etc.
So what we believe is that the Cassie lawsuit kind of spurred this investigation. But is it possible that Lil Rod's bombshell lawsuit that came out in February is really what kicked it into high gear? Because there we learned about the many hours, he says hundreds of hours of recordings. And then as we know, federal investigators were at multiple of his homes. Could those two things be correlated?
Oh, they absolutely are. They absolutely are. I would think that the feds or law enforcement was investigating from when Cassie's lawsuit was filed, but now they have additional fuel for the fire. So now in reading Lil Rod's lawsuit, now we're getting into drug use, we're getting into drug trafficking, we're getting into mules, we're getting into pink cocaine. Who knew? And so you're hearing and seeing all of these other allegations that now the feds can be like, okay, now I know I need to look for surveillance tapes. Now I need to look for this aspect. Now I need to speak to these folks because they were listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit. So for instance, Young Miami was one of the people that were mentioned as having been at those parties and may have been forced to do certain things at these parties. So now the feds know to go and speak to Young Miami. We don't know if her path intersected with Cassie's during the time that she was there. I don't recall her being mentioned in Cassie's lawsuit. So this is a new person now, a new player that the feds can go and speak to get evidence and get testimony and then continue to build the case from there.
All of that leads us up to right now and the speculation of what's next for Diddy. As far as Diddy's name, who's all over multiple of these lawsuits, I mean, he's the main kingpin in all of this. He may be facing some reputational damage, but I'm wondering what's going on behind closed doors with him and his attorneys. What sort of game plan are they making?
Well, I'm going to say that is going to be a very active war room right now, because basically they're going to be scrambling to figure out how to avoid criminal liability. Who are the people that are likely to testify against him? Can they try and mitigate that in any way, which I don't think they can? And then also preparing for criminal charges being filed and starting to think through what a defense strategy could look like, making sure that you have bond money set up in case there's bond available for whatever offenses he's charged with. And then, okay, making sure you have money set aside that wouldn't be, otherwise encumbered because, for whatever reason, right? I mean, there's a number of reasons why you may not be able to get cash out right away. Let's say if the cash is tied up in your house, you may not be able to get access to it right away. So you may want to have a separate pool just to be able to pay for that, right? So these are some of the logistics that his defense team might be looking at in preparation for the charges that will come, because there's no question in my mind charges will come.
I've talked to multiple different experts about this, yourself included, saying that charges are on the way. It's just a question mark of when, based on the timetable, the investigation, all the things that go into it. But let's say these charges do come whenever it is. What would it look like then when Diddy is arrested and booked into jail?
Well, I mean, it'll be the perp walk that'll be covered by every single outlet around the globe, right? So that is going to be, again, sort of that bombshell moment, because it's the culmination of all of these high profile and celebrities and folks coming forward with their testimony. So that's going to be huge. I think it's going to be very much parallel to what we saw with R. Kelly and other celebrities that have been arrested for similar crimes. So I think it's going to be a media circus in a lot of ways, but hopefully in all of this, the survivors will not get forgotten and will not get lost in the shuffle. They have to be the central focus of all of this. So, yeah.
It's also interesting that Diddy's case almost parallels what we saw with R. Kelly. They kind of mirror each other with the trajectory of things. And I'm wondering if it's possible that Diddy also faces a lengthy sentence if he is convicted. We saw that with R. Kelly, but could Diddy face the same thing?
I believe so. I believe so. Because again, we're looking at the number of charges, right? So if, let's say, the indictment comes back with 10 charges, there could be the question of whether or not those charges, if he's found guilty, would be run concurrently, meaning he serves his sentences on all 10 charges at the same time, or will they be consecutive? So will he, serve his time on one charge and then face another, X amount of years for the next charge, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all of those things will result in him facing a very lengthy sentence. I don't think even though he may not be sentenced to life, whatever he may be sentenced to may end up being a life sentence, seeing that, he's in his 50s. If he faces a 20 or 30-year sentence, that's effectively a life sentence.
As for what charges could be brought against Diddy, there are several possibilities.
I think we'll be looking at definitely narcotics charges because of the fact cocaine seemed to feature very prominently in all the legal filings. I think it's going to be around human trafficking or sex trafficking, basically, because again, you're moving people from one state to the other for the purposes of sexual gratification, right? And without their consent, and who knows if folks were underage. Like, again, we're still all finding out all of the details. So again, the investigation's ongoing, so we don't know where this may end. But those are the top charges I'm thinking of. There could be firearms charges, again, depending if guns were brought across state lines and the people who were bringing them were not licensed or something along those lines. So those are the things that I'm thinking will end up showing up in a federal indictment.
While it's still unclear what exactly the future holds for Diddy, Melba reminds us this has been a difficult road for his accusers.
One thing that was very stark for me was Lil Rod coming out and talking about the abuse he suffered. Because not only did he talk about the players and the different people that were in the Diddy orbit and some of the horrible things he witnessed, he himself was a victim of abuse. And so I just want to bring that up and highlight that, because too often we don't discuss men as victims of abuse, victims of sexual assault, of victims of sexual harassment, things like that. And so I think we really have to, again, hold space for him and really just, center him in our thoughts, because this is a tough thing to have to come out and reveal. There's still society still has stigmas around masculinity, and is he less of a man because he was victimized? The answer is absolutely not. But again, you have all of those other issues layered on that make this so much more difficult to go forward and to tell your story. It's hard enough for female identifying victims of sexual assault, survivors of sexual assault, to talk about what happened. But then when you add the gender aspect of him being male and how that is received in a lot of different quarters, and even some of the ugly jokes that I've seen being made on social media, we have to really start to break down those stigmas and know that men can be victims and survivors of sexual assault, and they should be supported in the same way as any other sexual assault victim.
So what does Diddy have to say about all this? Well, he hasn't commented on the raids publicly, but in the weeks after several of the civil suits were filed, he did make a statement. It reads, quote, "Enough is enough. For the last couple of weeks, I have sat silently and watched people try to assassinate my character, destroy my reputation, and my legacy. Sickening allegations have been made against me by individuals looking for a quick payday. Let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. I will fight for my name, my family, and for the truth." In response to the raids of Diddy's homes, his attorney released a statement the next day, reading, quote, "Yesterday, there was a gross overuse of military-level force as search warrants were executed at Mr. Combs' residences. There is no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities, or the way his children and employees were treated." As far as the allegations dropped in Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy's attorney Sean Hawley says, quote, "His reckless name-dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. We have overwhelming, indisputable proof that his claims are complete lies. Our attempts to share this proof with Mr. Jones's attorney, Tyrone Blackburn, have been ignored as on our calls. We will address these outlandish allegations in court and take all appropriate action against those who make them." This story is constantly evolving with new information coming out daily. For updates in Diddy's case, make sure to check back right here with Law&Crime for the latest. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.